Okay, good deal.
I think we'll get started. We're, I think, missing one person, but I think we'll go right ahead. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here this afternoon. On behalf of the college and all of the faculty and staff, really want to welcome you here today. Our day today on campus is a little hectic. We have students continuing to register for classes, and faculty are advising and doing all those things. So, you know, it's sort of part of the beginning of a great new year. But with that being said, I just feel very grateful for having Nick here, and he's been very gracious with his time this week. Nick and I go back 15 years. Nick was my very first boss. And I told him yesterday, you know, the first company we worked for wasn't the best experience, and it wasn't as if I worked for the company, I worked with him, and that was the experience. And, you know, Nick brings a tremendous amount of experience, and we had a faculty session yesterday with Nick that went over very well. We've had extreme positive feedback. Faculty have requested to meet with him one-on-one this week, and he's been very gracious enough to do that. One of the funny things about Nick is, and, you know, he's going to talk about expectations today, and up front in our relationship, he didn't set very clear expectations for me, and the example was on a trip he took me on to London. And we had, I think, about 9 days of work for a company. And we get on the flight in Chicago, and I'm not sure what my role is. You know, we get on the flight, and we have, there's good entertainment on the flights those times. You know, you could drink, and you could talk, and have fun. And it was a long flight. We landed at Heathrow Airport at 7 a.m., I believe it was. And welcome to the UK. Our session starts at, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning. But before that, Nick insisted, once we got to the hotel, I'd like you to have a traditional British breakfast, which I had no awareness of what that was, but I do not recommend it. We get to the session, and finally I understand what the expectation is of me. You know, it is, you are going to work with this group, and I am going to work with this group. And it was sort of one of those things where I had to say in my mind, okay, I guess I have to trust in my mentor and coach, and trust in my own knowledge. So I get with the session, and I immediately say we're having a break. Now, I'd never done this in my life. I'd never facilitated. I'd never done this formally. So I run around this little village looking for a pharmacy for some Pepto-Bismol or something, because my stomach, from the British breakfast Nick insisted on, was giving me some trouble. Found it, went to the session, had the most wonderful experience I've ever had. Nick was an excellent just an excellent coach, gave me tremendous feedback. The group was very, very receptive of my style. But I guess part of that was me realizing that he was setting an expectation in me, and that I needed to trust in who I was, and he would not have put me in front of that group because there was a vulnerability there. This was a client that was paying a lot of money for us to be there. And I was, you know, 26 years old, right out of graduate school, and he invested in me. And so it was a great success. A few other little things along the way that happened, but we won't get into those. But it was a great experience, very successful contract. Over the years, Nick and I have worked together on some smaller projects. Nick has worked with, it's Ginsink Steel Fabrication out of Grand Rapids, one of his largest clients, who actually, I believe, a write-up on that is on his blog, and that was one of his most successful alignment projects. Churner Steel, he's worked with me with Abbott Labs in Chicago, and a number of other companies. But we've had a great relationship along the way, and getting in here was kind of a year in the planning. I've been here 3 years working with the faculty, and we had a great session yesterday, as I mentioned, but one of the things that we're working toward is better alignment and better communication. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, because that's very nebulous in concept. But over the years, Nick and I have just had a great run, and I feel very...
You haven't found us out yet.
No, yeah. Very privileged, because not only I think will you appreciate his British sense of humor, which sometimes you won't get, but you know, I've learned to sort of get it along the way. But I think he's going to advance some very interesting concepts and things that I believe will help your organizations. He's also been very gracious. Everything we collect today is going to be donated to our Entrepreneurial Center of Innovation and Development, which I would be remiss if I did not recognize Beth Steiger, who Beth and I sat in my office 3 years ago and sort of came up with this idea for the Entrepreneurial Center for Innovation and Development, and our momentum has really, I think, in both of our minds, gotten to a point where we're very, very happy. And we have such big vision for the future. We know where we want to take this. We appreciate the business community coming together as you have and supporting us and being a part of this. And in return, hopefully, you take away from this session some valuable information and some concepts. The other thing that we're going to do at the end, and this is not a sales pitch, but Nick has a report slash book that he's going to offer, but the cool thing about it is, if you're interested in supporting that, the college is collecting that money, which is $50, and 15% of that's going back to our center as well. So it's a way for him to share his knowledge with you even more. So if you're interested in that, just afterwards, you write a check to We've Community College, and we'll bring that to the business center, and then we work with Nick on that arrangement. But that's up to you. So he'll talk more about himself because he likes to talk like me, but without that being said, Nick Anderson, Crispian Advantage, as we like to call him, the Chief Alignment Officer.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Ken. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. Okay, well, like most people, we have a lot of experience, and I'm not going to drone on about it, but I've left business cards at the end of the table because I write extensively on the subject area. So if you want to know more about something, you can come to me and say, have you got anything on? And then I'll just point at the blog, and there's free resources there. Okay. So, and that's probably the way we're going to make best use of our time up to 1:30, yes? 1:30. That's our hard stop. So I'm going to try and leave us 15, 20 minutes or so for questions, and don't let that stop you raising a question as I speak. I don't mind that, but that's sort of my game plan. If there's something you don't understand or you want me to go over again or give an example, that's fine. As we know, change is a really interesting subject. And for the last 35 years, I've been engaged in the problem of how do you improve somebody's behavioral skill in an environment which is toxic. And if you've ever experienced training and then coming back to work and somebody says, right, you've had your holiday, now catch up on your work. Has anyone had that experience? Don't shake your head in front of your boss. Anyway, why the Crispian Advantage? This is probably one of the most famous pieces of English literature. It's from Henry V, Shakespeare's play. And I chose it because the tagline is, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers and sisters. And the reason for that is, what I've seen over the last period is everyone's having to do more with less. And because of the stresses in our economy, particularly in Michigan, family life has become strained as well. And we'll be looking at the interrelationship between your personal side of life and your work side of life. Because I think there's something there for people when they're considering making change. And we'll show you some results. I'm going to try and keep the statistics down to a minimum, but and I'll talk about focusing change to win, which is the basis of this talk. But certainly today, this is my view of challenges. There is a lot of evidence, for example, Stanford University talking about leadership skill. And leadership skill today relies more on emotional intelligence than it does on technical intelligence. Because the more you give people autonomy to work in flatter organizations, the more you need emotional intelligence. In other words, reading people, not treating everybody the same, being sensitive to those people who need that sensitivity, and being just downright blunt with somebody who needs a little kick up their backside. But certainly the leadership challenges are not getting easier. The context for this, and I've lived in Michigan 15 years, so I've seen the worst side of the automotive industry. You know, talk to me about the wrong side of Battle Creek, Lansing, Albion, Jackson, and I can go on, and you'll see a wasteland, even today. We are not very good at change. 60% or more, that's conservative. Our projects, 70% of the leaders' expectations are either not known by the people implementing a change or they're not clear on what they are. So somebody walks into the office and goes, well, where is it? What? Well, the MJ143. What? What are you talking about? You know that feeling? You've got to be a mind reader. And certainly over the last 12 years, go to Harvard, go to McKinsey, go to wherever you like. Just go on the internet and you'll see these litany of surveys saying we get it wrong. Change is not happening successfully. And so, you know, now, after all that change, people are a little gun-shy. And the change bird keeps coming with those horrible things. But when we look at, if you are a numbers person, which I am, the costs of this to the economy are slightly scary. Because if you look at IT projects, for example, which is probably one of the most quantified areas about failed change, you start getting these sort of statistics. I love the Department of Defense, not really as a taxpayer, but out of $37 billion, guess what percentage of projects came in on time and were actually used for their intended purpose? This is your money, by the way. 7%. 7%. This is all published information. But really, IT projects are a microcosm. If you've been involved in any form of quality movement, lean construction, lean manufacturing, whatever the latest flavor or mantra of improving performance is about, you will know the problems that you've had to get it to work. Not as straightforward as everyone thought. Didn't cost as much as they thought. Oh, of course, it costs far more, right? And the other thing is, it's not likely to get any better. KPMG, does everyone know KPMG? No? Okay. One of the big consulting groups, they employ thousands of consultants. What was it? Keith Marwick and McClintock or something. It's a mangled name, you know, a bit like a law firm. But if you've heard of Ernst & Young, McKinsey, Mercer, the big consulting groups, that's one of them. IBM you will have heard of. They do a lot of that. And this is what they're saying. You know, 40% of them, senior executives that they surveyed, 40%. And less than half of them. So, I mean, today, I don't know your businesses, so forgive me, but is life getting more complicated than it was 10 years ago? You know, steel fabrication, silk screen printing, financial management, all the sort of family firms that I've worked with, life has not got any easier. And woe betide you're in telecommunications. Voice over IP 10 years ago was not believed in as a technology. For the people that were surveyed, and I'll go into more detail in a minute, but this is 700 plus people, they're saying, why? We asked them, they said, why do you change? And you'll find that they had combinations, because the percentages don't add up to 100%. That's because they tick more than one box. Right? They said, it's 3 or 4 of these things that are happening, and that's what we're coping with. So they're saying it's getting more complicated, and it's getting faster. So now we enter the world of complexity. But there's one thing for sure. Just because a situation's complex, do not be seduced into thinking that it needs a complex solution. And if you think about that as we go through, I'm not proposing adding anything. In fact, I'd like to take things away. And I'd like us to reflect on how we work with people, because that's the glue that will hold this whole thing together over a period of time. So, my contention is that if you think change is expensive, how about failed change? And I'd rather focus on how to focus to win. One of the things about this research, and it's lasted over 20 years, is the connection or disconnection between change and competitive success. How many times do we bring about a change and we're not actively thinking about how we can relate it to getting more business or keeping business? And you'll see the 1,000 or so people that responded to this survey have exactly that same problem. But failed change, of course, is not going to just impact one change. A survey recently said 43% of Americans don't believe what they're told. They're cynical. The current presidential campaign might also have something to do with that. But really, the toxicity is every failed change leaves its imprint. And so from what I'm going to do now is to set, that's the reason we did the research, because it's not getting any better. Lots of people are saying it's probably going to get worse. So what are people doing? Who's out there doing something that can actually help people bring about change more successfully and more consistently? Because obviously, once you have a success, and I come to you and say, oh, we're going to go and add now, we're going to do another change, you're probably going to be slightly more receptive than the last time we really screwed up, and you had to work weekends for about 3 years just to recover from it, right? It's just human nature. So focusing change to win is where we got to. The reason for this survey is so important is we've got failure rates, we've got survey executives, and this is consistent across the board, that people are the main problem. I don't know, how many of you have had construction experience? Been on construction projects? One or two, yeah. But if you talk to people in construction, they say, oh, building it's easy, it's the people. Certainly I have experience of that on large hospital projects where the design engineers won't talk to the subcontractors and so on and so forth. The other thing is the world economy is making it even more stressful. Your supply chain is probably going across country, not just out of state. Your technology is getting faster and faster. You know, one of the things that these politicians don't talk about is what technology is doing. There's a thing called Moore's Law. Moore's Law, Mr. Moore worked for Intel Corporation, and he said about 15, 20 years ago that the speed of a processor, that's the actual mind of the machine that you're holding in your hand today, is going to increase in speed twice every 3 years. He's still right that there's a relationship, but guess what? That processor speed's going up 3 times every 18 months. You've got more computing power probably in your iPod, pad, /phone, PDA, whatever they call it these days, than they had to take Apollo to the moon. You know, it's having a very insidious effect in terms of anything, aspects of design and engineering really have steadily revolutionized over time. It's the ability to create a design as needed to be through rapid prototyping and get faster. And the people doing change management, their track record isn't getting any better. That's what the surveys are saying. And there's not a consensus. There's not a clarity of, okay, understand, big problem, what do we do? And so my question is, which is I hope to offer some practical advice today, is what are the practical things, the practical differences, the things that we can do to help us thrive and not just survive? Because if we're just getting by, if you've got any length of work experience, you know getting by means you're on the ragged edge. The next time a problem comes in the economy or the competitors come in with new technology, you have less room to maneuver than if you're thriving. And we want to look at that dynamic. So from that perspective, just a quick commentary about the survey. Where did all these people come from? kicker's the bottom one, isn't it? These people represent over 11,000 years of change management experience. And they're still saying the reason they lose business is because of quality. They're not getting back with customers, and they're making too many assumptions about what the customer wants. Half of them either own their own business or are C-level. That means they're either a CEO, a COO. They're top executives, in other words. And the range of companies goes from 10 million through to 5 billion. So we're not, it is skewed towards the medium to small end. So, you know, I don't know what your turnover is in your companies, but certainly Ginseng Steel was 63 people, 20 million turnover, you know, and that's the sort of world I live in a lot of the time, is family-owned businesses employing those sorts of numbers. So we're not talking about what did Kellogg do, for example, although I could comment on what Kellogg does, but I'm not going to. So that's the basis of what I'm saying. I'm going to bring in other experiences and projects to hopefully shed some light on the issue. The other thing is, this survey is supported by, including this survey, here's the kicker. So where are we up to in this? We have got greater complexity, change, failure staying at the same or is sometimes increasing, and a lot of surveys are saying life's getting more complex. After 35 years, I got really interested, and that's why I teamed up with my co-author, Kelly Masu, to look at some of the things that was concerning us. Now, I'm going to cover 6 sections of the report, and I'm going to highlight certain elements. The idea is the report is laid out in a way where you don't have to read chapter 1 to understand what's in chapter 2, because your needs are different, right? And so what we have here is the why and what have changed. One of the things consistently is people don't understand why we're changing, what we're changing, and what we're not changing. Why do people resist change? Can we please uncouple the behaviour of change resistance from the causes, the stresses that people are under? Because I think that leads us to have a different perspective on what the problem might be. Instead of treating symptoms, your doctor hopefully is treating symptoms, but he's also looking for broader causes of why you have palpitations, why you have sudden bouts of dizziness or whatever it might be. And there are things he can immediately offer, or she can offer, to make you feel more comfortable. But the search then is on, you know, and all the technology that's there. The other thing, real curiosity, why bother measuring change? I don't know about you, but you'd think this question wouldn't need to be asked. According to the survey results, apparently it does. And the most important thing is, what do you measure? Because convenience doesn't really help you. The fact that you currently record a lot of stuff probably doesn't help you say, is my change being effective? Interesting. The other thing is, you know, if we change, can we gain competitive advantage? Now, everyone in this room presumably has customers and competitors, right? And we know that the competition, even though we've got the contract, they're always nibbling around the back, aren't they? Trying to get a little bit of leverage for the next time the contract comes up for renewal. Everyone's trying that game. So what can we do about that? Also, is your organisation really thriving? Or is it just getting by? This is an issue of what standards do we have for looking at ourselves and saying, you know what, we had a pretty good year. And that pretty good year doesn't necessarily mean we got the right net profit or whatever financial measure you have. I'm not diminishing the importance of it, but in what way did we increase our capacity to compete? That's a slightly different issue when we say we had a good year, right? And those 5 sections lead up to, okay, what are you doing about communicating change? What are these people saying about how you do it, what they do? And there's some real curiosities in the data about what they do. Because what they proclaim is they want to do, the way they communicate it would seem to be strange at best. So those are the 6 parts that I'm going to go through. I'm going to pause a moment and say, any questions or thoughts at the moment? Am I resonating with you about some of the challenges that you have at the moment? Okay, let's go into the first section then and look at, since when was common sense common practice? How do you improve your chances of thriving? What does thriving mean? Somebody said something very poignantly in one of their comments. One of the most interesting characteristics, can you imagine, you take part voluntarily in a survey on the internet, and then out of these 1,000 busy people, they wrote 6,617 comments. They wrote a lot. Presumably they thought it was pretty important, right? I mean, they didn't have any incentive, they didn't have any threats, there was no paying people, etc. This is what they offered. And one of the things they said is, well, when it comes down to it, if people don't trust you, what chance do you stand? And so, how do you keep this? The preoccupation with the people writing about this was, we've got to keep in the front of people's minds why we're changing, what is expected, and what it's not. Think about how unsettling it is not to know the extent of a change. That feeling of, what's next? So something that seems to come through time and time again is there's a framework of expectations which we can create that starts helping us manage the problems of change. And I'm obviously relating to people, particularly today, while we've got all sorts of technology and all the other things going on around it, but it seems to be people. This is what senior executives are saying, it's people. This is the top problem. There are many others, but this is the top one. And of course, what they're trying to do is manage this problem with communication. When a change starts, you move off the status quo, I assume, right? Things are not the same, we are now changing. And normally, somebody comes in and says, oh, I want you to re-enter all this data, and it's going to take you 4 days. And oh, by the way, I want you to continue your ordinary job anyway. So the effort's going up, and the perceived reward is going down. The biggest problem is where these 2 curves are greatest, and they will vary depending on the type of change you're bringing about. But everyone's standing there going, huh? So when they're doing the what and why of change, it's not like it's a single event. It's how do we keep the process moving forward so people can see that there is actually some beef in the paddock. They have some interesting intent behind that. And what I want you to do is look at that. These are the percentages of comments that relate to these subject areas. For brevity, involving some reference to participation, something about reducing fear, uncertainty and doubt, the FUD factor. Are you familiar with the FUD factor? Fear, uncertainty and doubt. And you've got rewards, improve, train and buy-in. Buy-in would be the WIFM. You know WIFM? What's in it for me, which is obviously an important part of the equation of getting somebody's commitment, is they can see there's something in it for them. Anything strike you as strange about those figures?
The line is really low.
I'm sorry?
The Y is really low.
0?
Well, the Y part of it is.
Oh, the Y
Is really low.
is really low. Yeah?
Most of them, all
All of them are kind of low. Right, right. Really curious. The extent to which, and this will be something we'll look at, is the extent to which people are thinking about top-down and bottom-up change. They talk a good game, but how are they coming over to people? Now, there's some things that leadership is required to do, which is to frame the change and say what we're going to do. You can't have a debate about that. It's probably down to a lot of analysis in the technology and things like that. That's the role of leadership, is to set the frame. This is where we're going to play now, right? What they mistake is, often in their arrogance, and sometimes just in the sheer overwork, they forget that people actually might have some good ideas. That's how to bring the change about. What a novel idea. And this is a curiosity. The reference to getting people on the same page, aligning people, seeing the thing the same way, whatever phrase you use, I call it alignment, right? You know that feeling that you work with somebody, you go, you don't get it, right? Yeah, that's that feeling of you're not aligned. And the other time is, oh, thank you. I don't even have to think these days. And somebody produces exactly what you want, when you wanted it, and you think, God, is that easy? You'll be thinking, I wish it happened more often, right? The other thing is, why do people resist change? And this is, like, what impact does failure have on your change culture? Because if it didn't go that well, if there was a new piece of design, CAD-CAM or whatever, and it wasn't integrated with the machines or whatever, and you had to sort it out, that's going to stick in your mind when somebody else says, oh, we've got this latest, and you go, oh, God, here we go again, right? What we have is that people are saying, they've got over 12 years change management experience, and they see things as a brownfield site. Your culture is not a greenfield site. So when construction people are looking at things that are easy to build and profitable, they would like a nice flat field with no lines of internet communication, old ducting and all sorts of things. The brownfield site is the middle of old Sacramento, and you're trying to build a hospital and somebody goes, oops, we've just found a 30,000 gallon oil tank. And in California, they come out of the woodwork. There's EPA and leaching, and suddenly your project schedule is now going out the window at a rate of knots, and your cost is going up. That's a brownfield site. The Lower Peninsula has a lot of brownfield sites because of the length of time we've been manufacturing things for the automotive industry, and there's some really nasty places. Pulp and paper is another one where you have really expensive cleanup costs. So if you think about that, you'd start approaching change a bit differently. It's not naive, oh, we're going to change and we'll tell everybody, and on Monday morning at 8 o'clock you're going to report to him, not her, and that sort of stuff, right? You're going to start to stand back and say, now, we're going to bring about this change. What have we got to work with? The other thing is change is accelerating. That's what the survey respondents are saying. And they have major consequences on employees. So if you are dealing with employees who are predominantly part-time, very often that means that you've got single mothers, you've got various family structures which make life complicated for people, and you want to put on a night shift, you might have a few questions to ask. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it means you approach it slightly differently than going, right, we'll put on an extra shift. Accelerated change failure, your toxicity is going up, so you start losing good people. It's always the good people who leave first. Have you noticed? Because they can get a job. So your toxicity isn't diluted by good performers. It becomes gradually more toxic because it's resident in fewer people. The other thing is, people don't separate the symptoms of change resistance from its causes. And that's why they say this. They say, we see resistance in our culture, and these are the top things. Notice how high those percentages are across 1,000 plus people. You could almost take that as a point with your change management team and say, are we going to avoid this stuff? Now let's just unpack change resistance for a minute. So we're talking the same language, right? Just because you think something's easy, somebody else can get stressed about it. It doesn't mean that person's ignorant, closed-minded, it just means they're different. It can take many forms. You're familiar with the dead hand of inertia? That's a good one. The passive-aggressive behaviour, which slows everything down, where your yes is not actually your yes, it could even be no, or it may be a definite maybe. And its root cause is probably going to lie somewhere in insecurity, and it's the fear of being an ex-employee rather than an employee. And so when the sense of insecurity rises, the resistance of behaviour will occur. Trying to predict what that will be in your planning of change for certain groups of people, because change doesn't impact people equally, does it? Some departments can be left completely unchanged, whereas some departments can go through a radical change because of what you're trying to do. But what are we going to get in terms of resistance, and why are we going to get it, is some pretty important questions to sit down and talk about. Now, particularly in small firms, you'll be able to talk about specific individuals. And in a community like this, you'll probably know something of the background of why they're resistant. Well, why doesn't that govern what you do with them different from other people? Doesn't mean you're treating them unfairly or preferentially. It just means you're considering difference. Here's the kicker. 60% of the problems you find in managing change are probably created by you. 40% you'll never get rid of. You'll always have 40% of people. We're all naturally resistant to change, right? It's in our DNA. We survive because things are predictable. When we are forced with unpredictability, we don't like that, so we react. Passively, aggressively, whatever it might be. But certainly, one thing, if you take nothing away from this, in the report, there's a takeaway at the end of each section, and it's like a discussion guide for managers thinking about change. And this is certainly one that I would recommend you sit down and think about. Because we're saying two things. One is, what change in the past failed? And that could be complete disaster through to 80% was successful, but some people were unhappy because. And if they're still employed and you're going to make another change, well, I don't know about you, but the old thing about the definition of madness being doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, right? We might like to stand back and think about that. Now, this could be you and your sibling, your brother or your sister, starting a new business, or taking the business over from your father or mother. This issue still applies. It's not number dependent. I'm just looking about very large companies, although they have their own problems that are even more complex. But if you're in a business of, say, 100 people, you've got 9,900 lines of communication. You do have 4,500 relationships potentially in that organization. It is complex. So really, we're going to look at change resistance, and I'm just asking anyone leading changes to say, okay, I know the reaction we're going to get from X, or this department, or this group of people. You know, why won't Fred do the preventive maintenance per schedule on the press so we don't have these problems of colour separation? Well, it turned out that he didn't realise why it was important. It seems incredible to say it, but actually getting him in a room and explaining that, you know, we only want you to follow this schedule. And on that occasion, on every occasion, it worked. The guy got it. Because we were told him, we said, look, if you don't do it, you're down the road. If you do it, we want to keep you. So that's important to think about it. The things that are coming about are these. These are the takeaways for you about resistance. How clear are you in your direction to all people? So Napoleon's got about 100,000 troops, and he briefs his generals in the morning. And he's only a little guy, right? And he goes, right, okay, everyone understand what we're doing? Then about 4 or 5 hours later, he walks down the line to a soldier standing there, wet, with a rifle, ready to go. And he goes up to them and he goes, "Hey, what are we doing today then?" And if there was a discrepancy, he knew that that clarity wasn't there. One of the reasons he was a good general, there were many other reasons why he failed, but that was one of the things that he did. He checked that people really did understand the direction. What we mistake, of course, is that we think that because we've told somebody this is what we're going to be doing, that we have communicated the direction. Is anyone under that illusion? This is probably not the talk for you then. Getting that through and keeping it constant, because it's not something that's going to emerge. The clarity of direction gets clearer because you're doing something, and you have to keep coming back and say, is everyone clear on what we're doing, why we're doing it? And there's some sort of discussion that takes place. And the important thing is, that is giving you a simple solution to a complex problem. If in your companies you do not have the means of distributing leadership, that's responsibility and authority for those people who have experienced the just having the responsibility. But if your leaders at the first level, call them charge hands, supervisors, Fred or whatever, right? Do they have the responsibility and authority to act when action is required? And stay true to the direction. Right? One of the people who helped me formulate this thinking was Art Corbett. And Art is a retired colonel in the US Marines. He also works for their military concept unit. And when we were faced with asymmetrical warfare, which is, oh, we've got all these people on our side, where the hell is the enemy? That's asymmetrical warfare. How do we manage that complexity? And that's what they wrestled with. And they said, well, look, if the person leading the platoon doesn't know that they have the authority to call in artillery, they call in an airstrike, and they don't have to report to anyone, as long as it's in line with the mission intent, we have to give them that freedom. That is releasing you from complexity, because you're using your leaders as they should be used to make tactical decisions in line with your direction. And that is one of the major tasks of people leading change. That clarity. The worst type is to think that you've got somebody trying to bring about change from top down, and they still want to maintain control that all expense chits over $50 have to be signed by me. That's making complex solutions out of complex problems. You've got to decouple it, right? Then you've got to get aligned change expectations. This is fun. And really, what we're looking at is, do the leaders actually develop expectations? One of the main problems in change is leaders don't articulate. They do not specify what they want people to do. So everyone's standing around thinking this is a mind-reading game, right? And it's surprising how specific you've got to be, unfortunately, but it's true that if somebody says, I want you to increase production, it's not an expectation, it's a fond hope. Right? I want you to reduce quality issues. What type of quality issues, when, what, blah, blah. All the questions go through your mind as soon as you hear those words, right? The other thing is, you then have to get expectations from the people as to what they expect of you as the leader. What a novel idea. And the critical thing here is change is about 3 things. Only 3 things. Here's the simplicity of it. What is it I'm going to say to you? Stop doing it, because I'm going to take that off your plate, which you already think is full, because I want you to start doing something while you keep the wheels of industry moving, right? Stop first, because people won't listen to you. If you said, oh, we want you to do more, and you're going, I did 50 hours last week, 10 of which weren't planned, right? And you missed the fishing trip, by the way. So, okay, stop, and then, okay, what are you going to put back on the plate? Start, and we have some value, some customers, some means of paying the bills, which we have to keep doing. And when people have that framework, stress starts to reduce. Now remember, the 60-40 thing, it doesn't go away, but it reduces. And so when we have agreed, oh, what a novel word, agreed the expectations, then we can start doing something about building accountabilities. So if you do this at this time, you agree to that, yes, I agree to it, and by the way, this is how you get rewarded. It's often in the comments of the people, the contributors, they don't mention how to reward people for changing, making that extra effort. That's crazy. Here's an example based on a construction project of what I just said. Tom is the owner's representative on a $650 million hospital project. Cliff is the general contractor's project executive. At this stage in the project, Tom had 13 expectations of Cliff. And Cliff thought he had 12. Pretty good, eh? Not so good. Cliff had 22 expectations of Tom, and Tom only thought there were 4. And this is not untypical, but that is an imbalanced relationship. That relationship is going to enter problems. So when I say leaders have to lead, they have to set the framework and the direction, and they have to specify expectations, because what else are people going to react to, right? But it has to be in the context of saying, okay, now, what do you expect of me? That's a novel idea. And if you don't marry these two up with critical roles particularly, you're going to have problems. So, and if, of course, if you leave them, as you'll be familiar here, like in many parts of America, potholes don't get any smaller. It's not an organic process that they just fill up by themselves, is it? You have the Channel 8 News pothole warning item about, what is it, March, April, depending on where you are. Probably a May for you guys up here, but you know, they're not going to get any better, and you might as well find out where they are, right? So if you're not setting the direction, building and getting the expectations aligned, you won't know you've got potholes until your chief engineer walks out the door. Or suddenly 5 people walk off the job. So change accountability is really simple to express, and it takes persistence to do it. What you expect people to stop doing has to be coupled with what they want you to stop doing. I want you to take control of shift B, and therefore I want you to leave me alone to run shift B, or any variation thereof, right? So the other thing is now I expect you to start doing something. And what do you want me to start doing? Well, I'd like you to start giving me better information so I can actually run the shift. Oh, okay, I didn't realise that. Good. This doesn't have to be contentious. This is, we're not going to hurt each other recipe, right? Because we're going to do it before the change comes about. And when things are, you know, the customer's complaining that the quality's not there, it's not being delivered on time, or whatever the issue is, that is not the time to do this. This is before we hurt ourselves. Let's get really clear about what we want to start, stop, and of course, what we want people to keep doing. You know, I want you to keep following up with the customer after each delivery to find out that they're happy with the quality. You know, that's good customer service. We don't want to lose that. That's what keeps us in business. That's what pays the bills, right? Okay, so the other thing is, while we're trying to get these expectations aligned, because they don't happen overnight, right? It's going to take some time. Have we got the blinders on? or as in English we call them blinkers. I don't know, what do you prefer, blinders or blinkers? Blinders, okay. So, you know, can he see out either side? No, well, and this is really curious, isn't it? Do you measure change, they were asked? Well, 63%, what a relief, said they do. 10% said they don't know that they measure change. And 27 said, no, we don't measure change. We think it's too difficult, was one comment I heard. The problem with that, of course, is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Whether it's human behavior, machine speed, wastage, whatever, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Right? And of course, that means that then we enter the world. And I didn't know whether people had heard these terms before, but a leading indicator tells you that the stuff is actually going to hit the fan. The lagging indicator says, yeah, it hit the fan all right. So leading and lagging is quite important because at the moment, if you look at your business, you probably are drowning in lagging indicators. Yes? And the more leading indicators you have, the more you can do what? Stop the stuff hitting the fan before it does, because afterwards it's a lot to clean up. Or to put it another way, we've just completed our high school football game. They come into the changing rooms and say, sorry, you lost 21-7. It's not good. So that's why you always have lagging indicators, don't get me wrong. It's the imbalance, that you don't have enough heads up to know that you're going to hit something or something's going to go wrong to prevent it. And that's really what we need. So in the report, we do have a whole section of questions that change metrics have to answer. Because you don't have a change metric for its own sake, do you? You presumably have some questions that you want to know about early enough to take action. Like if we hear a certain noise or something falls below planned maintenance levels, we know we've got a problem. Therefore, we can take action before a really expensive mistake occurs. And one of the things that people want to know about is we want to be able to navigate during a change. And we've got to wrestle with what we need to say every week, what do we need to heads up about? Also, change is not going to be one change. We need to review the change because we're getting ready for the next one. So how do we review our performance for that change? Sometimes this will be very simple. We were delivered on time, the system went up, it started producing the expected levels, etc. Pretty straightforward. Other times it will involve more people, and therefore it's a little bit more difficult to gauge how successful you've been. The other thing is we've got to plan the next change. So we need some sort of metrics which are going to help us get better and deal with any toxicity that we have in the people. So we need alignment tracking. How do we track things like poor interpersonal communications? You know, Jim does not get on with Sally, but it's an important relationship. It's not working. How do we get that to improve? Why are we getting this poor shift changeover or something like that, where we're getting inflexibility? Have we got productivity issues which we need to measure more carefully for this change? I say this change because it's very easy just to use the measures you've always got, whatever the accountants produce or the quality people produce at the end of a month, and you keep using it for the same change. It's not to say you throw those out, it's what do we need to add to measure to make sure the change is successful, right? So, and how do we coach people? If we don't coach new people, they won't understand how the metrics were created and what they're used for, and therefore we're going to have problems there. And we don't know who we want. If we're not measuring issues of human capital very carefully, then when we come to recruit people, we will recruit the wrong people again. Same technical skill, but not what we want. You know, there are some people who are inherently collaborative and team animals, and that's great for a particular role. And there are other people we want just to sit in front of a computer screen because they love problem solving on a screen and they want to be left alone. Let's not put a square peg in a round hole, right? Okay, so of course the issue comes when you're trying to look at individual relationships. It starts getting more complicated quite quickly. So 20 people, 20 times 20 minus 20 is 380. 380 lines of communication and 160 potential relationships in a group of just 20 people. In this room, you've probably got 25 or so, so you're up around, you're getting near 600 relationships. Because each one of you potentially could have a relationship with everyone else, and you've got to ask yourself, what do we need to focus on to make the change work? So here's 40 from yesterday. That's what Ken's managing. He's got 40 faculty members and 780 relationships, potentially. Which ones do we want to be full-bodied? Which ones don't we want people to actually use? And the relationship word is funny because I'm not talking about the social relationship that what's your name, I'm sorry? Glenn. Glenn and Chris probably know each other socially or through other organisations, and they get on really well socially. That's not the relationship I'm talking about. The relationship I'm talking about is that I now want Gary? Michael. I want Gary and Michael to do something different, that they need to share expectations as it relates to whatever the change is about. Okay? So that's the sort of relationships we're talking about, rather than just the social, hello, how are you, nice to see you, what did you do last weekend sort of conversation. The benefits of measuring change are these for the respondents. And looking at that data, what is it, what curiosity do you have about that data? What strikes you as strange about that data?
Looks like you're already restructuring for the next change. And you're learning for the next time.
Strong emphasis on learning. Okay, that's going to say, have we got the metrics to make sure we are learning? That's good, yeah. What else strikes you as strange?
They're doing it for themselves, not for their sales or customers.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, whatever happened to the customer? It goes back to the point that I was saying that when you're bringing about change, presumably you're doing it for competitive advantage. I say it naively to make a point that why are we changing if we're not going to do exactly what you say, right? Any other curiosities about that? There's a group of people, 1,000 people. The critical things are the point that was raised first, which was learning. Can we learn to do change better, whatever it is? Benefits of measuring employees relates to employee satisfaction, better morale, these sorts of things. They're trying to find measures which will say we can take action before the problem occurs with people rather than after the event. But a characteristic of this data is whatever happened to this. And you'll see it occur in different ways as we go through the data. It's very curious how change can make you blinkered to why you're making the change. At least that's what I think from analysing all the data. There's some things I just can't answer particularly, but it seems to be logical. Okay, so if change and competitive advantage should be linked, then how do we do it? Now, these people are very good. They say we measure customer satisfaction. Well, clearly there's something going on about the measurement of change, which we just saw, which means, Yes, really. And here we have it. The benefits of measuring change comments related to customers, 3%. Oops, what's going on here? And again, 12% for mentioned there, and even in the thriving organisations, it's 12%. The other thing is they say, and here's the paradox, or not paradox, it's a curiosity more than anything. They say they lose customers because of poor quality, poor follow-up by salespeople, and assuming they know what the customer wants. So where are we in this debate? I started off by saying a lot of change fails, right? And you're looking at this data from 1,000 people, 42% of which are from USA, about 10% from Canada. So a lot of people from our world, as well as from other worlds, saying some strange things. And probably that's why we're starting to say now, perhaps we start understanding why change fails. Because if we can understand that better, we can take perhaps preventative action, something practical, right? There are things that people who say they do to actually look at competitive success. And I'm just going to look up a particular set of questions for you. And I will get to it. The funny thing about this survey result is that it mirrors work done about 20 or 30 years ago in the UK. In fact, I based my master's thesis on that research study. So I was more than curious to say, well, 30 years on, has anyone learned anything? Well, there are some people out there that say there's certain things important about change and competitive advantages. The first thing is market and competitive sensing. And they ask questions like, what do managers do to maintain awareness of their competitive environment? They didn't specify a particular manager, they said all managers. The other thing is, how well do managers use this information to make more competitive decisions? And then, what should managers do to improve awareness and agility to compete? Well, they're pretty good questions, and within each of your organisations, the replies will be different, right? The other thing is about leadership. They say, what changes should managers make to develop a competitive culture? That's throughout the plant, throughout the office, wherever you are. How are we going to do that? How are you going to build more leadership capability to promote successful change? Can you do that? And those are two elements. There are others that are detailed in the report, but certainly the last one, agility, is an important one to consider. Let's look at the scenario so far. Everyone's saying it's getting more complex and change failure is not getting any less. That's the situation. So it seems important that we develop agility, because we're going to get rapid change, unexpected change. How do we cope with that? And they ask questions like, what do managers do to reshape or adjust strategies? This is a real tricky one from a leadership point of view, because you've got to set a direction, you've got to have time to implement it to see whether it's working, but at the same time something's going to come along and go, oops, have we got it right? It takes a leadership team to think that through, how we're going to handle that before it happens. Right? Now, for some people, who's familiar with contingency theory? Risk planning? Risk management? Someone? No? Yeah. Well, basically, if the British Army had read Clausewitz's book about 40 years before, he was a Prussian general, and he wrote a book they're still using in Army College today. It's called Clausewitz on War. And he said, you've got to think 3 moves ahead. So, who plays chess? Do you ever play chess? Bridge? Bridge, card game bridge? anything like that. Football, high school football, if you get involved in coaching there, you're going to think about, okay, we're going to do this, what are they going to do? Oh, that's what you mean by contingency theory. It's the what-if game, right? And it's the what-if game played 3 or 4 moves ahead. So it's something called pest analysis, you might have heard of. But it's trying to divide things into 2 buckets. One is, how do we protect ourselves? Because we can't control the market and what it does, but what can we do to protect ourselves? And what can we prevent from happening, because that is in our control? That's what these people are talking about. If you think about protect and prevent, you've got an idea about how agile are we to consider those 2 options. Now, if we were talking in the 1970s, the audience would glaze over. In the 70s was the 5-year plan. We create the strategy and we implement it, and then we measure it. It never really existed. It was a myth then. It's certainly absolute fantasy now, because 5 years ahead, who knows what's going to happen, right? Just think about your own specialism and what's happened in the last 5 years. In banking, it's called disintermediation. What? Basically, a loan company starts being a bank, and the bank starts being a loan company. That's called disintermediation, right? And it happens in all sorts of industries where suddenly the competitor starts doing what you're doing. And in fact, I didn't realize it was a competitor. And suddenly come out of the woodwork. That's agility. The other important issues are there, and if you're interested, I can certainly look at those questions in more detail if I have time later on. Okay. There's a lot to put over in a short amount of time, and I am conscious that it's lunchtime. So any thoughts so far? What's going through your brain as a result of what you're hearing? What are your thoughts? Give me some feedback.
The strategy of focus to win and implementing the correct way rather than getting the buy-in and everything else up front. Think about before the change happens, how to implement it, get it through, talk to the people, and get feedback before implementation.
Right. It's a lot easier than trying to salve a wound that's now draining blood out the body. Certainly. What else? What else is going on in your minds? Because there's a lot going on, you know.
Getting buy-in, I think in my mind, that's selling it to the people, department heads and so on.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know when you've got it? Which is what I inferred from what you said. What else?
Managers don't know their customers any better than they know their employees.
Yes, I like that. Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. It's like Top Gun without a navigation system. You've got an F-16 fighter, and we've removed your navigation system. You don't even know what your altitude is, and you're going to fly at Mach 2. You know? And even Tom Cruise couldn't get you out of that one. Okay? What else? What other thoughts do you have? Trust? Trust. Yeah. That relates to, I'm sorry, what's your name, please?
Joel.
Joel. So it relates, sort of, you infer it from what Joel said, don't you, in terms of trust? Yeah. How do we know when we're trusted? Trust is a very funny subject because we don't completely trust probably most people in our lives, but we have some trust on some occasions. And what we need is enough trust to actually give things a go. Yeah? We need enough trust to say, can you trust me just to give it a go, and let's, okay, I'll give you a month. But we need to know what that trust level is, and we need to know how we extend it. What would I have to do for you to actually commit fully to implementing the system. And you're going to have all sorts of replies which are going to tell me, my trust is conditional upon you being transparent and treating me like a fellow member of the team, or whatever. It can get negative, but it could be just you have certain things that I will increase my trust level if you, right? If you give me a report on Monday morning exactly what happened over the weekend, then I can go to the next level. And we have to have that dialogue because there's a lot of good ideas out there. There's a lot of people with a lot of, we should have a lot of respect for. I mean, in fact, we do. It's just that our actions don't actually indicate it very often, which is a bit like what we were seeing on the screen, right? These people are very well intentioned. You know, these are not, you know, as we say in England, bastards. You know. But they certainly have some things to think about. But the good thing is, to your point, it does get you to think about, now, are we really going to hurt ourselves? Or how can we at least protect ourselves against it? The focus of successful change is a repeat in some ways. You said, hang on a minute, I've seen that data before. It's actually just an emphasis that people are taking their eye, back to your point, whatever happened to the customer in marketing in this? But we come to the issue of, and this is a whole section in the data, and it takes a different slice at it. What we've done is create a 64-item discussion guide. It's not validated because it's just come out of the research, but it goes through all these different sections to say, are you just surviving or are you thriving? And it's a very interesting tool, I think, for a group of people to say, you know what, if we stand back before this change, right, Joel? If we stand back and say, you know, what is the state of Denmark like these days, right? My Shakespearean side coming out again. But as you see, on they were asked, what's the enabling side about? So, for example, in the leadership team, what are our leadership values? And the silence, and it's as though somebody's brought something out the back end of a deer and placed it on a plate in front of the group. Then you probably need to have a conversation, right? Because if leaders cannot articulate values, how are people going to trust them? And values are very important because they give decision guidelines to other people about what to do when life gets a bit complicated, right? If you know the owner of the company values this about customers and this is, you know, so when you get stuck and are not sure what to do, you can, with good intent, go in that direction, and somebody's probably not going to chew you out if it doesn't go right, but if they hear you trying to fulfill the values of the leadership team, guess what? It's probably going to work pretty well. And it's not complicated. So this values stuff is like, you know, sounds a bit woolly, human resourcey, doesn't it? It's actually quite important because that's what Art Corbett was talking about, mission intent. Do your people understand the values of leaders want people to follow? Like how they treat other people, for example. You don't need a procedure manual. You just need to know, you know, I've worked in some organisations where they said, I want this organisation run on Judeo-Christian lines. And Ken Ginsey won't mind me saying that because he's a man of faith, but that's what we worked with. He wanted his company to follow Judeo-Christian principles. Love thy neighbour as thyself, you know, etc. Now, if you understand that, and you understand that Ken is really sincere about it, if you reach a situation as a leader trying to handle a problem with him, what is him's name? Mike. It's a troublemaker. But if I know that my owner wants me to handle him along those lines, I don't need a procedure manual. I can deal with him. I can feel confident what I'm doing. And then Mike says, oh wow, they really mean it. So values and beliefs and things like that talked about can really simplify a situation because it simplifies leadership's decision making. How explicitly are you talking about that with your people? don't mean the pompous, this is our goal and vision and mission and blah, blah, blah. I mean talking to real people about real issues and helping them understand how you as the leader would employ values to make decisions, better decisions about people. That's really what it's about. On the right-hand side, it won't surprise you what a surviving organisation has as problems. The actual full report, in the report we selected 672 comments. Some of them are to the point of being poignant about poor leadership. We had one comment about physical intimidation and something else, which was, you just wondered what the hell they were, what sort of organisation they worked in. So, are you ahead or are you just playing catch up? This thriving and surviving is an ability in an organisation to have a debate about what it means to be doing well, because if people feel good, they're committed, they're clear about what they're doing, guess what? The lagging indicators will confirm it. But there's no amount of dissatisfaction, dead hand inertia and all those things that are going to change those numbers, right? And they go hand in hand. So what they were saying was, okay, what do we do? What questions do we ask ourselves to thrive rather than just get by? And these are some of the questions that we feature. And I've selected them from there. You know, how do we keep raising that standard with people to say, tell me, Joel, what's just getting by and what's really getting on top of it, right? And Joel, from your specialism and where you work in your company, you probably say, well, you know what, if we did this, this and this, yeah, we'd be able to compete. And in the bank, you'd have the same view. You know, what does it take to compete against the big banks? Right? What would it mean if we were thriving as a community bank? And people will tell you some very interesting stuff. They'll also be engaged in a conversation which you may not have had before. But setting the standard as leader and say, look, we just don't want to get by, we want to thrive. Because when we thrive, we have more room for manoeuvre when this stuff hits the fan. You know, we've got more money in the bank, we've got people who are agile, we've got the ability to turn on a dime when the smelly stuff is flying about. That's why thriving and surviving is not just an academic idea, it's an important energizing idea for everyone in the organisation. And learning. Learning has become almost like a dirty word. But unless you address it, you can't be agile. And learning does not mean what you're doing at the moment, although it can include it, obviously. But how do people learn from each other? How do people share ideas? Because that's where the real learning occurs, right? The real learning will occur. What's your name?
Chuck.
Chuck. Jock?
Chuck.
Let's see. Chuck. These damn American accents. Chuck. Chuck's learning will occur when he goes back to the work and he'll have a conversation with a colleague and says, you know what? And there'll be a question that's out of all this stuff I'm throwing at you. My apologies. But Chuck will say, boom. And he'll suddenly hear something he didn't expect from Mike. And Chuck and Mike suddenly have a different sort of conversation which just reshapes things a bit. That's learning. That's the ability of individuals to be curious about and get ideas from other people and build on other people's ideas. And when that happens, you thrive. If somebody puts forward an idea in a group and goes, no, we tried that in 1946 and it didn't work. The environment, which is actually called a filter meeting. There's a lot of research about that. But if I take Mike's idea and Chuck intervenes and goes, yeah, I like that. Could we just add something or just reshape that? Because I think that would work a bit better. Now Chuck and Mike are engaged in learning and Joel starts hearing this conversation and he starts getting more energized. Right? The research says you generate more ideas you generate better quality ideas of greater commercial value. And if you want to know the research behind it, I'll gladly tell you about it later. But that isn't just a human resource to, training programs. It's about real, what are the competition up about? What are they doing to us? And Mike says to Joel, I got a funny question from a customer. And he said, have you thought about doing it this way? And Joel says, I was reading something about a technical journal that XYZ Co. was considering doing that. So Joel looks to Mike and he goes over and he talks to Chuck. And Chuck said, have you heard about this? And he says, well, I was at a conference last week and a guy was talking about that. That's learning. That's starting individual people sensing, Mike's got a piece of information, Joel's got a piece of information, they're all sensing, but you only make sense when Chuck, Mike and Joel talk. That's the only way you make sense of it, because everyone has a single data point. The culture is right for sharing that information, and people are respectful enough to listen to what Mike, Joel and Chuck say to each other. Then, what's your name? Eric. Then Eric says, yeah, I heard so-and-so, and these three go, oh, so, we've got something. Now we should investigate. Because you've all been in the business long enough, your technical business, to know what changes really impacted you, right? When somebody says you can do that on a computer, you don't have to do it on a drawing. I mean, goodness knows what's going to happen next. So learning is probably one of the most important things to being vibrant. Okay, so we're all great communicators, right? Some really funny statistics about executives, and 94% of them think they're great communicators. And 60% of change still fails. So you can make your own mind up about those two, can't you? Right? But great communicators, the interesting thing is 1,000 people, 684 of them decided to write something here. We didn't ask them to. We said, if you'd like to write something, you can do. And probably it's because every 12 months or less, they go through a change. As we saw earlier, 3 or 4 things are occurring at once that lead them to change. And that might occasion the fact that they're living in a more complex world, and why communicating change is an important issue. So, look at this. This is what they communicate. Why am I concerned? So we've been through 5 sections, we've heard all the things about it, and I'm looking at this data, and I put this triangle on, and I said, I'm going to call it the zone of concern. Why?
Because leadership is down there, and you said leadership seems to be one of the biggest problems, and yet it's barely mentioned here.
Yeah. It's a case of physician heal thyself, perhaps. What else? Why am I concerned about that data? This is what they say they communicate about, right? This is 684 people have written comments that I classify by these subjects. He's got this one. You can't get there from here. You mean to tell me 1% of these comments, only 1%, less than 1% actually, when you take the total population of 6,617 comments, and they only refer to coaching to that limited degree? Does that worry you? Remember what we're saying, right? We're saying it's not getting any better, it's going to get more complex, it's, etc., right? This is like we're going towards a cliff. The buffalo are heading over the cliff. And we're not going to coach people. What? So my leadership are sitting on a veranda, some very nice golf resort, probably Little Traverse Bay, very nice golf. The leadership team sat there, "Oh, well, what do you think we should do, Henry?" Blah, blah, blah. And they come back and it's like Moses, you know, with the tablets. Here's the new commandments. And all of a sudden, everyone goes, what on earth are they talking about? You know, the fiery bolts and Charlton Heston's scary enough, but these commandments are really big. And we're not going to coach you. We're not going to have an expectation that our leaders coach their people. You're not going to get there from here. Plus, they don't talk about measurement. You can only manage what you measure, right? Inspect what you expect, or whatever particular mantra is in your mind, but it's the same principle, right? And we don't talk about leadership much. Leaders have to change just like everyone else, right? So this is really worrying. So the learning and the usefulness for this, for going back to your workplace, is when you hear some Henry go about, "Oh, we need some workshops and training, and we'll talk to the chaps," and that sort of thing, right? Well, it might have worked in a sort of B movie about the Second World War and, you know, the Battle of Britain and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't work today. And it doesn't work in India, it doesn't work in UK, it doesn't work in USA, it doesn't work in Canada. So this is a wake-up call to ask a question, what are we doing about it? And you might say, we're not doing too bad, but there's one thing we should do better. And that's the purpose of this session, is you're now thinking in perhaps a little bit more, in a different way, because that's what these sessions are about, isn't it? It takes you out of the workplace and you sit here and you listen to some weird English guy rabbit on, when's he going to stop, and is it 1:30 yet, all that sort of stuff. And I don't really mind, because out of all this, there will be some questions. Maybe one that you haven't asked for a bit. Like, whatever happened to Six Sigma? Kaizen, whatever. Isn't that washing up liquid? I don't know. Anyway, so you've got to be really careful about when you're communicating with people. You've got to have improvement and development of your human capital rather than just talk at them. That's what this slide's about. Right? And of course, just to re-emphasize the point, just the fact that we've got email, do not use it to communicate change. I actually have somebody who I coach, and he had 3 bosses in 3 months, and the last one was an email which says, "Will you please report to head office at 8 AM to report to your new boss?" Sam lives in Seattle, and you know, I really respect his ability. He's a good guy, good company man, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. And he got communicated by email. The biggest challenge for a leader, even in a company of 100 people, is how am I going to talk individually to everybody about this change in the way you've just described? And I'm going to reply to you, I don't care how the hell you do it, but you'll do it. Because if you don't, people are going to do what they've always done. Yeah, fine, I'll get to it. You bloody idiot. You know, I've been on enough shop floors and enough warehouses to know how people react. And obviously they're very polite to your face. And then they go behind the racking or behind the machines and they go, God, they've been drinking the Kool-Aid again. You've got to stop this. 60 to 70% of change fails in North America, and this data starts to explain in a different way why. You have something that's manageable because you work for smaller companies. They are inherently more agile, and that is a good thing, and you do have a lot more options to treat each other in a different way. And I would hope a better way. And that's not, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing what you did in the past. I'm saying it's coming from over there. What are we going to do about it, right? So, here's what not to do. This is my sort of, I collected them off the internet. They appeal to my sense of humor, but, you know, pretend that you know more than everybody else. We've never experienced that, actually. As a management consultant, the definition of a management consultant, for example, is to actually borrow your watch tell you the time, stamp on it, hand it back with an invoice. Just imagine. So I'm very good at it. And, anyway, but nothing worse than that, is there? Does everyone know what a CRM is? It's not something you go to a proctologist for, but it's a customer relationship management database. She's in banking, she'll know what it is. Timesheets, or, fill out the latest ha-ha and the sha-sha. Daily checks on everyone's work. I'm now going to talk to Fred, who's done this job for 25 years, and I am going to check his progress today. How about, he's a qualified engineer, but he can do these submissions. So this has literally happened in a construction firm. The guy spent 10 years at college for engineering. Not the easiest thing in the world to get, right? Certified engineer. And they put him on submissions for concrete for a year. And they wanted to know why he left. Interesting. Barriers between departments, that's always good. It's not a divide and rule thing, I don't recommend it. Of course, there's only speaking to people when you want to talk to them about increased targets, shortened deadlines, and ROI, and things like that. Very good. It really increases your ability to change. And any new idea, I want at least a 5-page submittal. In fact, we've got this form to fill out. It's got 16 sections on it. You think I'm joking? I've actually got one. Call lots of meetings. Meetings are really good, aren't they? I always think, at this point, for some reason I get the impression, I get this image of the American eagle in the Muppets. Do you remember that character? The Muppets, this big imperious nose of a bald eagle. We're going to have some meetings. And the biggest emphasis is, I don't really mind, but our ROI is off with our RFO, and our marginal is off. Everyone's going, The biggest thing about that means you're talking about stuff that people have no control over because it's a lagging indicator. The horse has actually bolted, and there's no point in trying to close the door. And of course, buy lots of computers, solve our problem, it's technology, yay! Here's some more thoughtful stuff. And this is what people seem to be suggesting about how you communicate change. And they're questions because each person lives within their own organisation, in their own milieu, as the French say, or midden, if you're using Anglo-Saxon Old English. Have you established a governing set of values? This is how we treat each other. This is how we treat customers. Whatever it is, does everyone know what they are? Because it's going to simplify your life, because Joe will make better decisions if he understands that we have values, he agrees with those values, and now I don't need to look round. I know Joe will make better decisions. Because Joe's more comfortable, it's more in line with his ethics, he's feeling it's a good thing to do, and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to create a procedure and check up on him. Because I've talked to him about his values and our values, and we have connected. We might not agree on everything. Right? So values aren't something that we talk about in human resource manuals. We talk about them because they simplify our lives, and you can make better decisions because you're confident your leadership team will support you. Right, doing right by the customer, right? My best example of that was somebody was in China doing a bid for a very large brewery, and the only expert he knew was in South Africa. And he called him and said, I need your help. And he said, I'm on the plane. He didn't get approval for it, but his VP signed off on it because it was the right thing to do, because that's what we needed to do. It's an extreme example, but that's what I mean. People are acting confidently within mission intent, they have the authority, they're doing something. Your life as a leader gets simpler because you don't have to look around and check up on people. Really important stuff. You know, how are you getting people ready for the inevitable change, which was your point, Joel, right? Don't try and improve change readiness in the middle of a change. That's what people are saying. A lot of evidence in the survey makes common sense, doesn't it? Right? Have you engaged stakeholders and change agents? Who are the stakeholders in a change? And it's those people who you need their support. It's those people who will be significantly impacted. And it could be, if it impacts your supply chain, it may be 3 or 4 steps in the supply chain that you're involved in. They are stakeholders. Or it could be just within your own company or office. Then there are those people who are champions. Those are the people that if you get on site, they will say the same thing you're saying with equal conviction and authenticity because they believe you. Because you can't do it all yourself as a leader, right? Do you have a change management team? Change management is a slippery subject. It needs skill. You need to invest in people who are going to represent different parts of the organization, different parts of the process, to actually be competent at change. Then how do you align the values and expectations? So we have a value of we always look after the customer. Joel might say, well, that's what I think you expect me to do. And I might say, well, actually, I'm going to change that slightly. I'll give you an example. We're changing from supplying a product to supplying a service. And that really starts changing. The value stays the same in how we're looking after the customer, but we have to treat the customer differently. What I'm trying to avoid there would be creating solutions which are not profitable, which are difficult to service, and I'm trying to make myself more competitive. Therefore, the value stays the same, but we'd better make sure we're not making any assumptions about what it means to look after the customer. Otherwise, we get 16 people creating 16 different solutions for customers, and they believe they're looking after them, and suddenly you're the person who has to fulfill those particular orders, and you can't run your plant efficiently. That's why that values and expectations, values tend to stay the same, expectations change, and you've got to be really careful about that. The other thing is leaders' communication. Look at this scenario. A lot of change fails, it's getting more complex. What does it mean for leaders? Leaders are not somebody who, I'm a leader now and I don't need any more help. You know, leaders need coaching. They have to deal with difficult issues. How are they going to be helped? Who's going to ensure the real change will be the outcome of authentic communication? You know, you do not want a second line manager going, well, people upstairs want me to do this, so I suppose I'll have to do it. So here's the briefing of the day. Yeah, right. How are you going to ensure all people know and understand your change rationale? You should be able to talk to everybody in your organization, and I mean everybody, about why we're changing. And how you're going to monitor employees' sense of fairness and trust, because if you lose that, you lose everything. Trust is the glue of success. How are we doing for time, Ken?
We're overtime.
Okay, sorry about that.
No less than that.
Oops. So, those questions, and what I hope you go away with is a series of questions that you can engage other people at work. And say, you know what, are we doing that? Are we doing it differently? How are we going to do that? Because that's what this survey is about. It's about helping people take a different approach to change. Thank you very much. Sorry I took over time, but as you probably gathered, I'm rather enthused about the subject.
It's number 10.
Yeah, where's Ted?
This far.
Sorry?
Yeah, number 10. What is it?
Oh, number 10. It's Ken's interrupt 10. Yeah, this is life gets tense, so how are we going to handle that? And there are certain things people do to make sure that people remain listening even when the stuff has hit the fan. And everyone's going to go, we don't want that, do we? So what are we going to do to actually handle that tense situation? Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the first time I've actually presented the findings of this report because we published it months ago. So I'm more than happy to take feedback from you. And I'm certainly interested in what thoughts you had if you've got time to stay a little while. So I'll hand it over to you. What value has this presentation been? And then in a quiet room you can tell me how I can improve it.
I think there's a lot to consider, there's a lot there to
Mhm.
look at and think about.
Thoughts? Silence is good.
This is okay.
I mean, I just take a second just to thank Nick again for doing this. And obviously, this evening he's doing something a little different for the community, but some of the things are the same here in terms of information. But if you have an opportunity to attend tonight, also. But again, if you have any questions for Nick, just let him
Sorry,
know.
I
But,
took over.
no, that's absolutely fine. Don't it's very informal, so don't be afraid to ask questions. He can answer a lot of things. So.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And if you've got time to stop, ask a question. If you've got to go, because I know you're a bit busy people, by all means go, and I won't take it personally. I'll just trip you up as you go out the door.
The openness for change is, in my experience, people that inherently have that openness for new ideas, creativity, trying something. I didn't see anything that really talks to that, because that's really, I think, a big part of getting to where you need to go when it comes to change is open to the idea initially. And maybe that falls into that whole resistiveness to change.
There is a section in the report where I talk about what's missing. And one of the things you're talking about, sorry, what's your name?
Jeff.
Jeff. What Jeff's talking about this openness, is be careful who you hire. Because fortunately or unfortunately, there are a lot of people with a lot of skills out there that you can hire from. But it's a personality trait, and therefore you need to make sure your recruitment covers that. And there are certain standard tests that you can use in your screening, and certainly in your interviewing of people, you should have a set of questions which relates to things like openness. Can you give me, and it's behavior, I don't know whether you're familiar with this, behavioral interviewing is based on getting the candidate to describe a case study. So in this case, Jeff's saying openness is important. Therefore, the question would be, can you give me an example from your recent working career where you collaborated in developing a new solution? Or whatever's appropriate to your business. But that's what I would be particularly careful about that, Jeff. The other point that you've raised in my mind is, where are the human resource disciplines? What do you mean? Well, benefits, rewards, job descriptions, pay for performance, they're not here. And Jeff, I couldn't find them. The 6 main human resource disciplines, there was not one mention of them. In 6,000 comments about managing change, and they don't talk about human resource. Don't know why, but you certainly tweet something. I remember when I was going through the analysis, there's something missing there. It's not in the data. Yeah.
Nick, you seem to be open to the open concept of people communicating. We've got some friends that own a company that's 524 people, and they're going to a setup where no cubicles or nothing, just walk in, sit down, and go to work. Don't sit by the same people every day, and just walk in and just take a spot. And, how do you feel about that?
I think I come from, well, I've spent a long time in Grand Rapids, so naturally I've talked to people in Steelcase. And if you talk to people in Steelcase and Herman Miller and the big office furniture companies, there's a lot of discussion, and there's some real specialists about answering that very question for a particular culture. In the Bushmen of the Kalahari, there is a particular, when they set up camp, they have these like horseshoe sort of structures and they all face each other. And there's a lot of theory behind how people learn and the oral tradition and those sorts of things. And that's one concept about how to organise a space. The other one is the IBM changing the office space for the project. So all of a sudden Jeff is now on a project with Joel and Chuck and Mike, and they happen to work in 2 different buildings. Not anymore, guys. Here's your space. And some people would say, allow them to organise their space as they want to, because, and I've got a colleague, Terry, who likes this. I'll be talking to Terry and suddenly he'll glaze over a bit. And I know that's the time to leave him alone, because he wants to go away and sit down and think about it. And I know what he's going to come out with. So I love the man to death, he's a great friend, but he has a particular working preference. So I would say make it as flexible as much as possible, and within the constraints of the building, cabling and other things like that, which often put a kink in that particular idea. And the other thing is that, you know, people do have a very, part of their security is knowing their space. So I think you've got to be sensitive to the fact that when you're bringing about change, it's not one size fits all. No more desks.
A couple of companies I've worked with, Tetra Pak, Vernon Hills, Illinois, and they have set up like that. If you walk in on their second floor, they have large tables. I'm sorry, I almost whacked you. But they have large tables, and generally 3 or 4 on a table. So they're really interesting design, and their walls are all different colors, and they have large common spaces. And that's everywhere, and they're actually encouraged to switch spaces once a month. So this could be my workspace this month. Next week I may move. And the coolest, probably one of the coolest companies I've ever had an opportunity to work with. Did work with them almost a year. And then Siemens, which is very big, has cubicles for everyone. Doesn't matter what level you're at. In most cases, at least where I was at in Chicago. And just recently, a colleague who works there, they're taking down the cubicles, and it's just open. So, I mean, there's some complexity to that, but there's some pretty interesting dynamics that do occur, because you don't want to work in your silos. But the Tetra Pak model was pretty cool, and that was 6-7 years ago now, and I know they've evolved from that. But yeah, I did notice that the first time I saw that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
you know. Because you're right.
One room's all glass, and so everybody
Yeah.
sit there can sit there and look at it.
And all their rooms were glass, so you
Plastic
could
board, but even anybody sitting in the room can watch what they're working
bright
on.
colors and just really cool
See,
stuff.
I thought it'd be too distracting, but
No,
they're very happy with it because of the interaction of other people on that. Even if they're talking on the phone,
Yeah.
2 people over says, "I know about that project."
yeah.
You know,
There's some people who have distinct phases of work, one of which is very collaborative, discursive and all those sorts of things, and then they've got to go away and go in their cubicle. They've got their cave, because it requires so much concentration.
Another company, Zappos, which many of you probably heard of. I was able to get a grant and send one of our faculty members to Zappos in Vegas, and he spent the day there. And we have this thing now where if we have issues with people, we sort of say, well, you know, that person just wouldn't make it at Zappos. I mean, it's just an amazing place. I haven't been there personally, but Mark went, one of our counselors and faculty members went, and did the tour, spent some time with the employees. I mean, the CEO is, I actually have a picture, but I can post it, I'll put it on our ECID site we're creating, but I mean, it's sort of it's just in the middle of the company, and it's wide open, and he's got like I mean, it's just, anybody can walk in. He happened to be out that day. It's Tony Shea is the CEO, but everybody there is just in bliss. It's just absolutely amazing. The longest customer service call that one of the ladies giving the tour told Mark was 6 hours. I mean, it's about, and I actually tested this theory, and I tried this. I read Tony Shea's book. You can call Zappos, and you could ask them. I did this, and they gave me Angelo's Pizza was the recommendation. I asked them, and nothing to do with the company. I just said, I'm just calling, and I said, do you know of a good pizza place in Ironwood, Michigan? And they gave me Angelo's, and they sell shoes. And it was a matter of connecting with me, and they took my information and said, well, we hope you'll order something. Someday I've since ordered a pair of shoes for my daughter, which, I 3 exchanges to get the right size, but it was just seamless. CDW in Chicago, they have a similar culture. I mean, open cafeterias. I mean, people can eat. dinners are subsidized, families are invited for dinners. I mean, it's just an amazing place. I mean, but, you know, and the guy that started CDW, I had a chance to meet him. He started it in his garage in Vernon Hills, and just the coolest guy. I mean, just one of us, just a regular guy, and just, you know, his expectation was, I want you guys to have fun at work, but my expectation's up here, and people lived up to it. So, and all those companies are generally pretty open to, you know, if you just show up and say, hey, I'm, you know, Ken Trask from Ironwood, and I own the company. I heard some great things. You mind if I wander around with one of your managers? And I bet you 9 out of 10 times they'll say absolutely. So, anyway, sorry, but there's some places I've been. So,
Hopefully we gave you a few.
Well, just interesting concept. My dad
Yeah.
went to an open house a week ago. And
It's pretty cool
it was
stuff.
Very different.
I've been at CDW.
yeah, you've been up there. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So good. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate your support. Have a wonderful afternoon.